Alright everyone, today's video should be a little bit quicker than the previous one because it's the same examples, it's the same data, and really we're just looking at how to do hypothesis testing for comparing two sample means instead of making the confidence intervals. So again, our two examples, one was about comparing battery life between Energizer and Amazon Basics, and we were looking at there was a set of data, you already typed it into list 1 and list 2, and we were looking to see if the mean battery life of one was greater or less than the other. Now again, the way I put my data in, I put in Energizer first and Amazon Basics second, and if you had done it the other way around, it's really no big deal. It just affects how you would describe and later find your alternative when you put it into your calculator. So in this case, no matter what you did, when you're comparing two means, your null hypothesis should be that there is no difference. Okay? Now, my alternative hypothesis, because I put Energizer first, was that the difference between Energizer and Amazon would be less than 0 or negative, implying Energizer has a lower battery life than Amazon. If you had done that the other way around, then you would have been saying mu1 is minus mu2 is greater than 0, or that mu1 is greater than mu2, which is a Pokemon, Mewtwo. Alright, so anyhow, that's up to you. However you assigned that or define that, that will later show up when you type it into your calculator. Just like previous video, the only difference, instead of saying this is a 2-sample t-interval, it's a 2-sample t-test. So here we go, how you would do that in your calculator. You go to Stat, go to Tests, it is option 4. Now, again, this first example is data. You have this data hopefully still in list 1 and list 2. You can see right here that my alternative was that it's mu1 is less than mu2. So again, this is where you would have maybe picked that. It's not going to affect anything. The only difference, you'd have a positive test statistic. I have a negative one. The p-value would be the same. So you can see for my example, my test statistic was negative 2.546. with a p-value of 0.0157. Now, you can go ahead and put those in there. I have to clarify something. I believe I made a mistake on something I sent to you before, so I need you all to fix that, and I'm going to show you that right now. So first of all, they didn't tell you what alpha was in this problem. Usually you know it when you're looking at a confidence interval because you have the level of confidence. But just so you're aware, what you would do, and I messed this up before, and I apologize. I looked at old notes. If it's a one-tailed hypothesis test, your level of significance is simply 1 minus the confidence as a decimal. So it's typically 0.05 because we're typically assuming things have 95% confidence. Now, if you're doing a two-tailed hypothesis test, which we'll see, or anytime you're doing confidence intervals, it's always 1 minus the confidence divided by 2. So, where I screwed up, I did this. This is a boo-boo. This is an oops. You need to flip these around. These were old notes I wrote. I brought home an old packet. I just kind of took a picture of it, and I later realized it wasn't making sense. This is bad. This is good. And again, it kind of makes sense. If there's two tails, you should divide the amount in that, rejection region by 2, because you're splitting it into the two tails as opposed to 1. So, my bad. I apologize. This is something I just found real quick on the internet that might make things easier to understand. If it's 95% confidence, 1 minus that means the rejection region 0.05. That makes sense. If it was two tails, you have to take the 0.05 and split it into two tails as opposed to 1. So that's why you would have 0.025 in both of these if you had the same level of confidence. So again, I apologize. This is accurate. My previous explanation was bad, so I'm sorry about that. So in this case, the alpha level, based on the previous question, notice this didn't say anything, but based on our previous video and notes where we were looking at 95% confidence, I would want a p-value lower than 0.05 because this was a one-tail test. Now, I designed mine to be one tail lower. If you had picked this, that's one tail upper. But again, same p-value, same rejection region amount of 0.05. So, that said, It says right here, what's your decision? Well, we decide to reject the null hypothesis because our p-value of 0.016 is less than the significance level of 0.05. So we, as a summary to this, would say there appears to be statistically significant evidence to suggest the true difference in the means of battery life of AA batteries between Energizer and Amazon Basics is less than 0. And again, that implies Energizer doesn't last as long as Amazon Basics. And if you would phrase it the other way, you would have said there's statistically significant evidence Amazon's difference with Energizer is positive and is greater than 0. So again, a couple things to clarify there. I apologize. I hope I didn't over confuse you. I hope this picture helps. I think that is what you want to stick with. And again, I apologize about the one above. Okay, so what about a two-tailed situation? Let's look at that here. So if you remember from the previous video, we were looking to see if the mean amount of soup eaten from a normally, or just someone filling it with a ladle, bowl is different than if you had a self-refilling bowl. So again, your null is that there is no difference, and your alternative is that the difference is not 0. That's another way of saying these two aren't the same. All right, so same thing. We would call this a two-sample t-test. We would move on, and what the calculator looks like here, remember you'd still go to stat tests and pick two-sample t-test, but you would pick stats as opposed to data. You would pick not equal to, and this is what we would get. So you can see your test statistic, negative 3.1, and a p-value of 0.003. Now recall, when it is not equal to, this would be a case where the rejection region, now that we've explained this better, is split up. So it was 95% confidence in the previous notes, and I would take the difference between 1 and 0.95, which is 0.05, and divide it by 2. So I'm looking for a rejection region of 0.025, meaning if my p-value was lower than 0.025, then I would be rejecting. And my p-value is 0.003. So that is less than 0.025. So the reason I'm stressing that, again, typically, like if you don't get the alpha thing I'm talking about, if you know you're going to reject, you could just say I'm rejecting because my p-value is so low. However, to get like full super credit for everything, you would want to say something like, since the significance level, which again, this would have all been one problem, so it's not like I'm just pulling this out of thin air. Since the significance level for this test was 0.05 divided by 2, or 0.025, our p-value is lower than that. That's why we're rejecting. So if you're scared, you could say the generic, my p-value is too low. I'm rejecting the hoe. But if you want to be more specific, you would say my p-value of 0.003 is less than the alpha or significance level of 0.025. And then again, what's your conclusion? There appears to be statistically significant evidence to suggest the true difference in mean amount of soup eaten for a ladle-filled bowl is different than that of a self-filling bowl. All right, now if you were to have picked one of these alternatives when the time comes, like if you knew, like you were very sure that the refilling bowl was definitely more, you would still have the same conclusion. You would just have a different degrees of freedom, maybe a different test statistic and p-value, but you'd still end up rejecting it. So I just wanted to let you know that as well. What you pick as the alternative, it kind of depends on what you're testing for. But in this case, we are testing for just, is there or is there not a difference? Not that one was more than the other. All right, I hope that helped. Please go back and fix this if you have not already done so. I apologize. And again, any questions, let me know. And we will eventually be working on some practice questions on this and the next day. Thanks, guys.